I hadn't used a dating app in ages, but life had thrown me some curveballs. For years, I've been trapped in a cycle of smoking cigarettes, and to make matters worse, my sleep schedule was a disaster. I'd stay up past midnight, often dragging myself out of bed well into the afternoon. Recently, I started seeing a therapist for my nicotine addiction, but progress was slow, and I felt like I was stuck in a rut. One night, as I stood on my balcony, my usual spot for a smoke, I noticed something odd. My neighbor, a guy I'd never met, had a black van parked in his driveway, replacing his usual navy blue BMW. My curiosity was piqued, but I shrugged it off at first. However, the next night, the van was back, and I began to wonder about its purpose. I made a game of it, watching from a distance and spinning wild theories in my head. Then one fateful morning, everything changed. It was around 5 a.m. when I spotted my neighbor emerging from his house, carrying a long black bag that resembled a set of golf clubs, only heavier. My heart raced as I watched him place the bag inside the van and speed off into the darkness. My mind buzzed with questions. What was in that bag? Determined to uncover the mystery, I decided to keep an eye on his movements. I stayed up late, waiting for the van to return. Finally, around 1 a.m., I pulled back into the driveway. I could see him struggling to haul the same heavy bag out again, his silhouette moving cautiously before disappearing into his house. Something about it felt off, and I was on edge. The next night, I flipped a coin to decide my next move and opted to follow him. As soon as the van pulled out around 4 a.m., I hopped in my car, my heart pounding with adrenaline. I turned off my headlights and trailed behind him, the eerie darkness swallowing us. After 20 tense minutes, he veered off onto a dirt path leading into the woods, and I followed, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. The path led to a deserted gas station, shrouded in shadows. My neighbor's BMW sat parked outside, and I suddenly felt a rush of anxiety. I parked my car and approached cautiously, my instincts screaming that I shouldn't be there. The gas station doors were locked, and I was moved around the building. I noticed it was completely abandoned, but still had an alarm system. Why would a deserted place need an alarm anyway? Against my better judgment, I picked up a rock and smashed a window, shattering the eerie silence. Instantly, alarms blared, sending me sprinting back to my car. Panic surged through me. I spit away, adrenaline coursing. As I called 911, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had just done. The next morning, I woke up to a shocking sight. Police cars swarmed my neighbor's house, lights flashing wildly. I watched in disbelief as officers let him out in handcuffs. A whirlwind of questions swirling in my mind. What had I just stumbled into? I tried asking the police for details, but they stonewalled me, leaving me in the dark. Desperate for answers, I attempted to return to the gas station, but the road was completely blocked off. I stood there as my heart was racing, wondering if I'd ever muster the courage to venture back into those woods and uncover the secrets lurking in the shadows. I've always been a heavy sleeper, so when strange occurrences began to invade my nights, I was utterly unprepared. Growing up, I didn't have sleep disorders like night terrors or sleep paralysis, just the occasional nightmare, which I often found thrilling, like living through a 3D horror movie. I shared my apartment with a roommate named Trish, and while we had different work schedules and rarely saw each other, that July would prove to be unforgettable. It all started after my recent breakup, during a particularly hot week when my window AC unit hummed loudly, drowning out the world. One night, I fell into a deep sleep and found myself dreaming of a family gathering around a dinner table. But instead of familiar faces, I was confronted by a terrifying creature that resembled an alien from science, complete with horns and claws. Definitely something out of a horror movie. I tried to escape, but ended up in a nightmarish version of my own room, where the creature loomed closer before I jolted awake. My heart raced in the dark, and I dismissed the nightmare as just that, nothing more than a bad dream. But the next night, something happened that shattered my sense of safety. I woke up to find my bedroom door wide open, which I always kept shut unless I was drinking. I figured it was Trish checking on me, but when I asked her the next day, she denied it. I wondered if I had gotten up in my sleep without realizing it. The very next night, the same demon from my first nightmare returned, but this time I was trapped in a dark, empty room with it. I felt its presence closing in on me, suffocating me, until it was right above me. It scratched my thigh with a claw, and this time I could almost feel the pain. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, but something was different. There was a light sting on my upper thigh. I was panicking. I rushed to the bathroom and flicked on the light, only to scream in horror at what I saw. A gash on my thigh, as if the creature had really marked me. I bolted to Trish's room, waking her up in a frenzy. She was just as shocked and bewildered, asking how I got that injury. We tore through my room, flipping over sheets and looking for anything that could have caused the wound. Nothing made sense. But in that moment, what else could we think? Then Trish put her finger to her lips, signaling me to be quiet. She turned off the AC, and for the first time, silence enveloped the room. It was in that stillness that we heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from under my bed. A chill ran down my spine as we exchanged terrified glances, and we both instinctively knew we had to get out. We raced to our neighbor's apartment, knocking frantically until he answered. An older guy. He didn't seem like the fighting type, but we were desperate. He let us use his phone to call 911. As we waited for the police, we heard a door slam in the hallway, and it sounded chillingly like ours. We couldn't move fast enough to see who it was, our hearts pounding with dread. And when the police finally arrived, they confirmed the intruder was gone. But we had left every light on in the apartment when we fled, which meant our uninvited guests knew we were aware of them. The realization hit me hard. The creature in my nightmares was likely a manifestation of the intruder. I had dreamt about him even before I had any idea he was there, lurking in the shadows. To think that he had scratched my thigh, leaving a real mark, was disturbing beyond belief. This experience completely changed how I viewed dreams and nightmares. They were no longer just reflections of my subconscious. They had taken on a terrifying, tangible form that I would never forget. The lines between sleep and reality blurred in ways I could never have imagined, and the horror of that summer lingered long after the nightmares faded. When I was just a little kid living in our old house in Suffolk County, Long Island, I was about 6 or 7 years old. My older brother and I shared a massive bedroom on the top floor that used to belong to an elderly woman my dad rented to. After she moved out, the entire space became our playground. The layout was simple. Our bedroom was on the left, straight ahead was the bathroom, and to the right was an extra kitchen and a small bedroom. Our room was filled with countless toys and games, including a race car toy that had flashing lights and made various sounds, like honking and revving. It was a gift from my brother, and we had it for as long as I could remember. One night, as my brother Luke and I lay in bed, still awake, the room was suddenly pierced by the loud revving of that toy car. The lights flashed on, illuminating the dark room. I was frozen in fear and immediately accused Luke of pranking me, but he was laughing, insisting he hadn't touched it. My heart raced as the car fell silent again, and though I was terrified, I eventually drifted off to sleep. Days went by without incident, but the next creepy occurrence was just around the corner. One night, while we were in bed, we heard a strange thud echoing through the room. Luke, always the jokester, teased me about a ghost lurking nearby, and I yelled at him to stop before I went to get Mom. Just then, we saw the lights flicker back on from the corner of the room. The toy car was activated again. Panic stressed me out, and I bolted down the stairs, crying for my mom and spilling my terrified tale of ghosts and thuds. My mom, half asleep, assumed Luke was trying to scare me, but he protested, pointing out that there was no way he could turn on the car from his bed. That night, fear sent me to my parents' room where I slept with them, too terrified to face the shadows alone. Time passed and the unease faded, until one fateful night when Luke was gone, likely at a sleepover. I was alone in our big room, my heart pounding in the dark. I had tucked the car away in a small bedroom across the hall, trying to forget about it. After my mom kissed me and said goodnight and left the door open, I rolled over trying to sleep, but anxiety kept me wide awake. Then came a sound unlike anything I could describe, a soft rolling noise down the hall. My heart sank as I turned to see the toy car gliding into the room, its lights flashing ominously. I screamed with every ounce of terror I felt and pressed my back against the wall, calling for my mom. My parents rushed up the stairs, Their faces a mix of confusion and concern. They found the car sitting there in the middle of the floor, its eerie glow lighting up the room. I was frantic, insisting that someone had pushed it in. My dad went to check the other rooms, but there was no one there. No hiding places, no signs of life, just the chilling emptiness of the upstairs. My parents were torn between dismissing my fears as childish imagination and grappling with the unsettling possibility that something was truly wrong. The toy car didn't have a feature to move on its own. Yet, here it was. To ease my fears, my dad smashed the toy and threw it in the neighbor's trash. But the relief didn't last long. I ended up sleeping in the room for a while until my dad finally insisted I need to return to my own bed. That night changed everything for me. It instilled a deep belief in the paranormal and made me question what truly lingers beyond death. The feeling that something unseen was watching, waiting, and perhaps even toying with us has haunted me ever since. When I was 21, I spent a lot of time home alone in my parents' house, which backed up to a serene little pond. Across the pond was a small town park, and our neighbors were pretty spread out, making the area feel upscale and private. My parents were well off, and we had multiple homes, so I often found myself alone during the summer while I was in college. One summer night, I settled into my favorite sunroom, where the cold breeze wafted through the open windows, making it the coziest spot in the house. I was engrossed in my favorite show when I suddenly heard splashing sounds from the pond. At first, I thought it might be a duck or a goose, but the noise persisted, growing louder and more intense. Curiosity piqued. I turned down the volume and leaned closer to the window, straining to listen. What I heard sent a chill down my spine. This splashing sounded too heavy to be a bird. It was as if someone was in the water. I cautiously stepped out into the darkness of the backyard swallowing me whole. Just as I did, I began to hear a deep humming mingled with the splash. Someone was definitely swimming in the pond, trespassing on our property. I flipped on the lights to the backyard, illuminating just a small portion of the water, and the splashing and humming abruptly stopped. Whoever was out there had spotted me. For a moment, I considered what it might be one of the neighbors, though it seems a little strange since nobody ever swam in that pond. Unsure and a bit freaked out, I decided against confronting whoever it was. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me and texted my brother, hoping for some reassurance. But my anxiety grew as I tried to focus on the TV. The sound of the night outside were unsettling. Suddenly I thought I heard a movement on the deck. My heart raced as I fumbled for the remote and switched off the TV. The room plunged into darkness, and as my eyes adjusted, I froze. Someone was outside, breathing heavily right next to the window. Panic surged through me, and instinctively I laid flat on the couch, trying to remain hidden. In that suffocating silence, a deep voice cut through the darkness, saying, "I see you." My stomach dropped, and without thinking, I blurted out. I said, "Paul, is that you?" Paul was one of our neighbors, and I clung to the hope that maybe it was just a prank. But silence followed, broken only by the sound of footsteps retreating into the night. I was terrified. I stayed hidden for what felt like an eternity before the urge to check the doors overtook me. I leaped off the couch and dashed to the front door. It was locked. The side door was secure too, but my heart raced as I texted my entire family, frantically explaining what was happening. My dad urged me to turn on the backyard lights and check for any intruders, insisting I had to protect the house. Gathering my courage, I flicked the backyard lights on and stepped onto the deck, the knife clutched tightly in my hand. The yard was eerily quiet, but as I scanned the ground, my blood ran cold. I found wet footprints, still glistening, leading away from the pond. I followed the trail around the side of the deck, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then I saw it, something straight out of a nightmare. A man's head peeked over the edge of the deck, his eyes locking onto mine with a chilling intensity. The moment we made eye contact, he turned away as if waiting for me to come closer. My heart was racing. I bolted back inside and called 911 before even informing my parents. I locked myself in as adrenaline was coursing through me, anxiously waiting for them to arrive. When they finally showed up, relief washed over me. They asked if we had any enemies or troublesome neighbors while conducting a quick sweep of the property. I shut every window tightly that night, turning on the air conditioning for added security. As I drifted off to sleep, sunlight streamed through the windows. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I was grateful that whatever or whoever had invaded our space hadn't returned, leaving us with the unsettling mystery of who that man could have been. I have a dog that I walk 3 times a day, in the morning, the afternoon, and finally at night. We always take the same route through our driveway, which leads to the parking lot of the condominium complex where we live. I've grown accustomed to our late-night walks, and it's never posed a problem until one fateful evening. It was a typical night as I embarked on our final walk, flashlight in hand, since the parking lot is pitch black. I was listening to music with one AirPod in, wanting to stay aware of my surroundings. As we approached the parking lot, I noticed something odd. A faint voice echoed from ahead of us. At first, I shrugged it off, lost in my own world of music. But then I paused, pulled out my AirPod, and strained to listen. The voice came again, more distinct this time, but I still couldn't see anyone around. Despite my unease, I made the reckless decision to continue walking forward, telling myself it was all in my head. Yet, an unsettling feeling gnawed at me. I stopped again, this time next to a row of parked cars, flashlights sweeping the area, and then I heard it. A muffled voice sounding like a child whispering, saying, "Help!" My heart dropped as I heard that, and panic was coursing through me as I searched frantically with my flashlight. I was certain that the voice had come from among the cars, but there was no child in sight. No one at all, just me and my dog, who seemed blissfully unaware as he sniffed around some bushes. Then, it came again, 3 more times. Each time it was coming from my left, where the cars loomed ominously. The panic intensified. I had to make sense of this. My dog's ears perked up, his gaze fixated in the same direction as I was looking, and that realization sent a chill down my spine. The voice didn't sound entirely like a child. It was unsettling, a bizarre blend of an adult and a child's tone. It was muffled, as if someone was trying to call out from the inside of a car or hiding in the shadows. And there was no urgency in the way it was spoken, just a flat haunting repetition. Feeling trapped in that eerie moment, I bolted straight home, my heart racing. I rushed to explain to my mom what had happened, but she was just as puzzled as I was. I suggested we call the police on the off chance that someone was truly in distress, but she dismissed the idea as unnecessary. My mind was flooded with questions. Why was the voice so muffled? Was there someone in one of the cars, concealed from view? Or was it something darker lurking, waiting for me to come closer? To this day, the memory leaves me feeling profoundly disturbed. I still think about that moment standing in the dark, flashlight shaking in my hand, and the chilling whispers that echoed in the night. The parking lot, once a familiar space, transformed into a realm of fear and uncertainty. I never discovered the truth behind that voice, and the mystery still haunts me. What I'm about to share is the reason why my parents moved away from a house that had been in the family for 3 generations. For most of my life, I struggled with depression, a heavy weight that made me feel useless and alone. I spent countless hours in my room, isolated in a wooded area, surrounded by trees on 3 sides and a forest that separated us from our neighbors. My room was large for a child, located in the back corner of the house, with 2 walls lined with windows that faced the dense woods. It felt like a prison, especially for a kid who was already afraid of the dark. The strange occurrences began when I was around 10 years old, in the 5th grade. At that age, it was deemed unacceptable to crawl into my parents' bed after a nightmare. Yet, I was often accused of having an active imagination. My nightlight had various color settings, and I preferred a calming red light, which was what I was always feeling asleep to. Until one night, I woke up abruptly in the middle of the night, something I rarely did. I was exhausted and quickly drifted back to sleep. But I noticed my nightlight was no longer red. It had changed colors. I brushed it off, thinking I must have imagined it. A week later, I woke again to find my nightlight had switched to another color. I was confused this time. I asked my parents if they had been messing with me. They looked at me bewildered, claiming they hadn't touched it at all. They suggested that it must just be a glitch, which I accepted for a while, but then one morning, I discovered that my nightlight was completely unplugged and lying on the floor. When I asked about it, my parents shrugged it off, and my dad insisted I was too old for a nightlight anyway. A few days later, my nightlight vanished altogether. I know my parents were hiding something from me. This led to a huge fight between us, each side accusing the other of stashing it away. I was devastated. How could they lie about something so trivial? After that confrontation, things settled down for about a week. But then the real deal, the real nightmare, began. For 3 consecutive nights, I woke up for no apparent reason. Each time, I felt a deep sense of dread creeping over me. After the 4th night of waking in a cold sweat, I decided to stay awake and figure out what was happening. That's when I heard it. Faint rustling noises coming from my closet. My heart raced as I called out to my parents, desperate for them to believe me, but they brushed it off. My dad even checked the closet, only to find old toys and posters. The next 4 nights were pure torture. I woke up each time paralyzed with fear, listening to the rustling in my closet. I finally begged my parents to take me seriously. My dad, frustrated, dragged me back to the closet, determined to prove there was nothing there. He started tossing toys around, clearing space, yelling at me all the while. But then, as he ripped a poster from the wall, both my parents froze, their faces drained of color. Behind that poster was a gaping hole in the wall. My mother screamed as my dad grabbed a flashlight to peer into the darkness. The hole was far too deep to see where it led, so he dashed outside to inspect the house. What he found sent chills down my spine. A small hole in the ground at the base of the house. So we started digging, revealing a hidden passageway from the woods directly into my room. That night, my mother and I fled to my aunt's house, shaken to our core. We moved out shortly after, leaving behind a home that had once felt like a sanctuary. The experience still haunts me, a dark shadow in my mind that I dread confronting. My parents refused to talk about it, perhaps feeling some guilt for not believing me. It's terrifying to think that a stranger might have been in my room every night for over a month. I'll never know what they wanted, but I've learned one thing. If your kids come to you with something that sounds outlandish or abnormal, believe them, because you never know what might be lurking in the shadows. My name is Leo, and to be honest, I'm feeling a bit lost in life right now. Without diving too deep, my family situation is a mess, and for the past 3 years I've been trying to stay as far away from home as possible. My close friends from high school are changing in ways that do not resonate with me at all, and my hometown feels devoid of any opportunity. As I approach my senior year in college, I find myself grappling with uncertainty about what the future holds. Last year I found myself in Berlin, searching for something, maybe a sense of belonging or direction. I wandered into a bar called Roya, enjoying My name is Leo, and to be honest, I'm feeling a bit lost in life right now. Without diving too deep, my family situation is a mess, and for the past 3 years I've been trying to stay as far away from home as possible. My close friends from high school are changing in ways that do not resonate with me at all, and my hometown feels devoid of any opportunity. As I approach my senior year in college, I find myself grappling with uncertainty about what the future holds. Last year I found myself in Berlin, searching for something, maybe a sense of belonging or direction. I wandered into a bar called Roya, enjoying the solitude when it was time to leave. That's when I realized my apartment keys were missing. Just my luck. I stumbled out of the bar, knowing my parent was locked tight and it was far too late to get a replacement set. Instead of panicking, I decided to find a place to sleep for the night. As if my luck couldn't get worse, it began to rain. With nowhere else to go, I ducked under a nearby bridge, feeling slightly safer from the elements. As I started to drift off, I heard faint voices echoing across the river. Curiosity pulled me awake, and I squinted into the darkness, spotting 5 men on the opposite shore, gathered around a small boat that was tied up. They didn't seem to notice me at first, but soon enough, I realized I was witnessing something sinister, a drug dealer unfolding right before my eyes. My German isn't really great, but it didn't take much to piece together what was happening. Briefcases and duffel bags were exchanging hands, and my heart raced as I considered my options. I thought about moving to a safer spot, but didn't want to draw attention to myself. I decided to wait it out, hoping the situation would resolve itself. Suddenly, one of the men yelled something angrily in German and pulled a gun on one of the others. A thick tension hung in the air as the threatened man raised his hands, speaking rapidly in what looked like a desperate attempt to save himself. What happened next was absolutely horrifying. The other men started stripping the man of his clothing and confiscating his belongings. I immediately started panicking as I couldn't stay there any longer. I slowly got to my feet, but just as I began to move, one of the men shouted, roughly translating to "There is someone there." My heart raced as adrenaline kicked in. I didn't even look back. I bolted in the opposite direction, running for my life as their voices echoed behind me, shouting things I couldn't fully comprehend. The only words that were registered were "do not shoot." I ran until my legs felt like lead, and I was on the brink of throwing up from exhaustion and panic. The fear of those men catching me drove me forward, a primal instinct to survive overriding all else. It felt like a twisted game of fate, and I was finally slowed down. Breathless and terrified, I couldn't shake the thought that I could have easily lost my life that night. Sometimes I still think about it and wonder if I'm destined to run forever, always looking over my shoulder, haunted by the shadows of that night. It was just another ordinary Friday afternoon at my high school, and I was trudging down the hallway with my friend Emma, who was chatting about something I wasn't really paying attention to. My mind was preoccupied with the chaos of my life. Between the struggles at my home with my foster parents and the pressures of school, I was feeling overwhelmed. As we passed the bustling lunchroom, an urgent need hit me, and I asked Emma if she needed to use the bathroom. She said no and promised to wait for me outside. I stepped into the bathroom, immediately struck by an eerie silence. It was odd, because this bathroom was usually packed with students. Shaken off the feeling, I went into a stall. Just as I settled in, I heard the unmistakable sound of the entrance door swinging open and shutting hard. Someone had entered, but there was no further movement. My first thought was that it might be a student hiding from a teacher, so I shrugged it off. I finished up, stood up to bottom my jeans, and glanced at the graffiti covering the walls. Typical rants about teachers in some random coats. Then the door creaked open again, assuming the other person had finally left. I stepped out of the stall, only to find Emma waiting for me with a look of horror on her face. "What's wrong?" I asked, all concerned. Her voice shook as she asked me who was standing right behind me in the stall. A chill ran down my spine immediately as soon as she said that. I assured her that no one had been in there with me, but she was adamant. Emma explained that she had entered just moments before I came out, realizing she needed to go, but froze when she saw someone standing behind me in the stall, their shoes touching the back of mine. I felt my stomach drop. I had distinctly heard someone enter the bathroom, but I never heard them use the toilet. I was certain I was alone. Emma's face was pale as she insisted that no one had gone near the door until she walked in. And that's when I really began to feel uneasy. I didn't believe in the supernatural or any of that, but the weight of the situation sunk in. I found an administrator and shared what happened, hoping for some reassurance. Instead, she brushed it off, suggesting that Emma was just messing with me. But I knew my friend well, and Emma was not the type to joke about something like this. She looked me straight in the eyes, deadly serious, recounting exactly what she saw. And that was when dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lurking in the bathroom stall with me, especially since I had clearly heard the door open and close twice. Even now, years later, at 18 years old, that unsettling experience haunts me. And I can't forget that chilling moment in the school bathroom when the line between reality and the supernatural blurred in the most terrifying way. This all began years ago when I was 20 and just started my first big girl job in a small town. I rented a cozy little one-story house with 2 bedrooms and just enough space for myself, along with the occasional gathering with my friends. At first, everything seemed perfect. My landlord, whom I'll call Michelle, was friendly and easygoing, and I thought I had found a great place to settle down. But a few weeks into my stay, things took a dark turn. One night, while I was unwinding after work, I heard a knock at my door. I was confused for a bit. I called out, "Who is it?" But there was only silence in response. I hesitated, deciding it was best not to open the door. After all, who would be knocking late at night? The next morning, I stepped outside to find a large note tapped to my storm door. It read, "Hello, beautiful." My stomach immediately churned. I instantly remembered the knocks from the previous night and felt a wave of unease wash over me. Who would do such a thing, I crumpled the note, disgusted, and tossed it in the trash, hoping this was just a one-time occurrence. But that night, as I cooked dinner, the knock returned, this time even more insistent. My heart was racing. I approached the door silently, straining to listen. There was no peephole, no way to see who stood outside without opening it, which I refused to do. The second night in a row of this unsettling pattern made it clear I was dealing with a stalker. I called my parents, all desperate for any advice. My dad, a retired police officer, didn't offer much reassurance. He said the police wouldn't help unless they caught the person in the act, and suggested I stay inside at night and avoid opening the door. If things escalated, he would come and stay with me. I took his advice to heart. The next morning, dread washed over me as I checked for another note. To my horror, there it was, another piece of paper stuck to the glass. "I like to watch you," it read. I took a picture and sent it to my family and Michelle, asking if she had any issues with stalkers. She seemed genuinely shocked and insisted she had no problems of that nature, which left me feeling more uneasy. In a burst of frustration, I left a note of my own on the door. "If you're looking for Michelle, she does not live here. If you continue to come here, I will report you to the police." I felt a flicker of confidence, believing it might end the madness. That night, I lay in bed, anxious but hopeful that my message had worked. But when I opened the door the next morning, my heart plummeted. The note wasn't mine. It was a new one. "I'm not looking for Michelle. I'm looking for you," it said, followed by my name. I felt sick. My dad rushed over, packing a bag and driving up immediately. By the time I got home from work, he was already there, ready to protect me. The day had been a nightmare. I couldn't focus on anything but the fear gnawing at me. My mind raced with possibilities. Could it be someone from work? I felt paranoid, especially with a creepy coworker, Fernando, on my radar. As night fell, my dad and I decided to call the police. We wanted to let whoever was lurking know that we weren't alone. An officer arrived, and my dad, with his background, made sure to assert the seriousness of the situation. After taking a report, he stood there watching on the front stoop, determined to keep me safe while I tried to sleep. Luckily, the stalker didn't return that night, and soon after, I moved out. Michelle was so much understandable of the situation, and thankfully, whoever had been watching me didn't follow me to my new place. I was relieved, but still haunted by the mystery of who had been lurking outside my house. Though I would never know their identity, the fear lingered, a chilling reminder of how quickly safety can unravel.